They say love makes you blind, but nobody warns you about the aftermath, when your vision clears and you see exactly what you've become. I'm Zara Okafor, and 3 years ago, I thought I'd found my soulmate. Instead, I found my destroyer. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus had this way of making me feel like I was the center of his universe, at least in the beginning. He'd surprise me with my favorite coffee, remember every story I told him, and make me laugh until my stomach hurt. But looking back, I realize those weren't acts of love. They were his research phase. He was learning exactly how to break me down. It started so subtly, I didn't even notice. A comment here about how my laugh was a bit loud for the restaurant we were in. A suggestion there that maybe I should tone down my opinions when we were with his friends. He had this talent for delivering criticism wrapped in concern, making me grateful for his honesty instead of recognizing it as poison. "Babe, I'm just looking out for you," he'd say after pointing out that my presentation style at work was too aggressive or that my outfit made me look desperate for attention. And like an idiot, I thanked him. I actually thanked him for slowly erasing who I was. The worst part wasn't even the constant criticism, it was how he made me complicit in my own destruction. He'd ask for my opinion on something, then systematically tear it apart until I'd end up apologizing for having thoughts in the first place. I went from being a confident marketing director who led teams and closed major deals to someone who couldn't order dinner without second-guessing myself. My friends tried to warn me. My sister practically staged an intervention, but Marcus had convinced me they were all jealous of what we had, that they couldn't understand our deep connection. The isolation was complete before I even realized it was happening. The breaking point came on a Tuesday that started like any other. I'd been working on a proposal for months, a complete rebranding campaign for a luxury skincare company called Lumiere. It was innovative, bold, everything I used to be before Marcus convinced me I was too much of everything. I was finally feeling like myself again when I worked on it. That morning, I made the mistake of sharing my excitement with him. I showed him the presentation, explained how I'd identified this gap in the market for authentic, inclusive luxury beauty. For the first time in months, I felt that spark, that confidence that used to define me. Marcus barely looked at the screen. "It's nice, I guess," he said, not even glancing up from his phone. "Pretty basic stuff, though. I mean, everyone's doing the diversity thing now, right? Kind of feels like you're just following trends instead of setting them." The words hit me like ice water. All that excitement, that pride in my work, just evaporated. But then he looked up and smiled, that same charming smile that had hooked me 3 years ago. "Don't get me wrong, it's good work for you. I just think maybe you're aiming a little high with the whole luxury market thing. You know how competitive that space is, and with your... well, you know how sensitive you get to rejection." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That afternoon, I presented my campaign to Lumiere's board. I walked into that conference room feeling small, second-guessing every slide, every word choice. Marcus's voice was in my head, telling me I was reaching too high, that I wasn't cut out for this level of work. I bombed. Completely. Spectacularly bombed. Not because the work wasn't good. Looking back, I know it was brilliant. But because I presented it like I didn't believe in it myself. I stammered through my pitch, undersold every innovative element, and practically apologized for taking up their time. They rejected it on the spot. Worse, they went with my biggest competitor, someone who'd clearly lifted ideas from the proposal I'd been foolish enough to share online in a professional forum weeks earlier. I walked out of that meeting feeling like everything Marcus had ever said about me was true. That night, I came home devastated, ready for Marcus to comfort me. to tell me it would be okay. Instead, he was packing. "This isn't working, Zara," he said without even looking at me. "I've been thinking about it for a while, and I need someone who can keep up with me, you know? Someone who's going places." I stood there, watching. 3 years of my life get shoved into a duffel bag, and all I could do was ask what I'd done wrong, what I could fix, how I could be better. He paused at the door, and for a second, I thought he might change his mind. Instead, he delivered the final blow. "You want to know the truth? You're just not ambitious enough for me. You play it safe, you aim low, and honestly, it's exhausting pretending to be proud of you when you're clearly not going anywhere." The door closed behind him, and I collapsed. Not just physically, though I definitely ended up on my kitchen floor crying until I couldn't breathe. I collapsed as a person. Everything I thought I was, everything I'd built before Marcus, just crumbled. For weeks I couldn't function. I called in sick to work, ignored my friends, lived on delivery food and self-pity. I kept replaying every moment, every criticism, wondering if he was right about me. Maybe I was too sensitive, too ordinary, too small for the dreams I used to have. But then something happened that changed everything. I was scrolling through social media at 2 a.m., as you do when you're having a complete breakdown, when I saw an article that made my blood freeze. Marcus Rivera, rising star in fashion marketing, lands dream role with Lumiere Cosmetics. The same? Marcus, who'd told me luxury beauty was too competitive for someone like me, had just been hired as the creative director for the exact company that had rejected my proposal. The same company that was now using ideas remarkably similar to the ones I'd shared in that professional forum. In that moment, sitting in my dark apartment surrounded by empty takeout containers, something inside me shifted. The fog of self-doubt that had consumed me for months suddenly cleared, and I saw everything with brutal clarity. Marcus hadn't just broken up with me. He'd systematically destroyed my confidence, isolated me from my support system, and stolen my work. And now he was being celebrated for it while I rotted away, convinced I was the problem. But here's what Marcus never understood about me. What 3 years of manipulation couldn't erase. I wasn't just ambitious before I met him. I was ruthless. And he just reminded me exactly who I used to be. I spent that entire night researching, planning, remembering who Zara Okafor was before she let someone else define her worth. By sunrise, I had a plan that would make Marcus regret ever underestimating me. The woman he'd left broken on that kitchen floor was gone. In her place was someone he should have been very, very afraid of. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but I was about to serve it nuclear hot with a side of complete professional annihilation. After discovering Marcus had stolen my work and landed the Lumiere job, I knew exactly what I had to do. The question wasn't whether I'd get my revenge. It was how spectacular it would be. I spent the next 3 days doing something I hadn't done in years, remembering who I was before Marcus convinced me I was nothing. I pulled out my old portfolio, looked at the campaigns I'd created, the awards I'd won, the clients who used to fight to work with me. I'd been a force in this industry, and somehow I'd let one manipulative man make me forget that. But Marcus had made one crucial mistake. He thought he'd broken me completely, that I'd just fade away into obscurity while he built his career on my stolen ideas. He had no idea that his biggest victim was about to become his worst nightmare. My first step was research. I spent hours digging into everything about Marcus's new position at Lumiere, his responsibilities, his upcoming projects. What I discovered was even better than I could have hoped. Not only was he using my rebranding concept, but he'd pitched it as his own. Revolutionary idea. The man who'd told me I was following trends was now being praised for the exact innovation he'd dismissed. Then I found something that made me smile for the first time in months. Lumiere wasn't just any company. They were about to launch their biggest campaign ever, A complete brand overhaul that would either make or break their next decade. And Marcus, in his arrogance, had convinced them to bet everything on the strategy he'd stolen from me. The beautiful part? I knew exactly where the flaws were. The original concept I'd shared online was deliberately incomplete. I'd learned years ago never to put my best ideas out there for thieves to steal. What Marcus had taken was the shell of a brilliant strategy, but without the crucial elements that made it work, it was destined to fail spectacularly. But I wasn't going to just sit back and watch him crash and burn. That would be too easy, too passive. I was going to actively destroy him while building something so much better that the entire industry would see exactly what he'd tried to steal. I started by reaching out to my old network, the contacts I'd neglected during my relationship with Marcus. It was humbling at first. I had to admit I'd been absent, that I'd lost myself for a while. But the response was overwhelming. People remembered my work, my reputation, and they were excited to see me re-emerging. Then came the masterstroke. I remembered Sarah Kim, a former colleague who'd left the corporate world to start her own beauty brand. She'd been struggling to find the right marketing approach, and I realized she was the perfect partner for what I had in mind. I called her on a Thursday afternoon, my hands shaking as I dialed. This was the moment of truth. Could I still pitch like the old Zara? Or had Marcus's poison permanently weakened me? Sarah, it's Zara Okafor. I know it's been a while, but I have a proposition that could change everything for both of us. I laid out my vision. A luxury beauty brand that wasn't just inclusive in its marketing, but revolutionary in its approach. Where Lumiere was trying to appear diverse while still catering to traditional beauty standards, we would completely reimagine what luxury beauty could be. And I had the complete strategy to make it happen. The real strategy, not the watered-down version Marcus had stolen. Sarah was silent for so long, I thought the call had dropped. Then she said the words that made everything click into place. When can we start? We met the next day at a coffee shop downtown, and I watched Sarah's eyes light up as I walked her through the real campaign. The psychological insights into consumer behavior, the market positioning that would capture both established and emerging demographics, the visual identity that would make every other beauty brand look dated overnight. This is incredible, Zara, she said, leaning forward. But it's going to require serious investment. We're talking about launching a complete luxury line with a marketing budget that can compete with the major players. That's when I dropped the bomb that would make everything possible. I have a trust fund I've never touched. $3 million that's been sitting there because I was too proud to use family money. But this isn't about pride anymore. This is about building something that will make the industry take notice. We shook hands that afternoon, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The thrill of knowing I was about to create something extraordinary. But more than that, I felt the cold satisfaction of knowing Marcus had no idea what was coming for him. Over the next 2 months, Sarah and I worked like women possessed. We developed products that were genuinely innovative, not just repackaged versions of existing formulas. We created a brand identity that was so sophisticated it made other luxury brands look amateur. And we crafted a launch strategy that would coincide perfectly with Lumiere's big campaign rollout. I used every connection I'd ever made, called in favors I'd been saving for years, and leveraged relationships I'd thought were dead. The old Zara was back, but she was sharper, more focused, and driven by a purpose that Marcus's version of me had never possessed. The timing was crucial. Marcus's campaign was set to launch in 3 months, and I needed to be ready to overshadow it completely. But I also needed inside information about his timeline, his strategy, his weak points. That's when I remembered Jessica Torres, a mutual friend who worked at Lumiere's PR firm. She'd tried to stay neutral during my breakup with Marcus, but I knew she'd seen through his act from the beginning. I took her to lunch on a Tuesday, and after some careful conversation, I learned everything I needed to know. Marcus was struggling. The campaign wasn't coming together the way he'd promised, and he was making desperate changes that were only making things worse. The board was starting to ask questions, and his timeline was slipping. "Honestly, Zara," Jessica said, lowering her voice, "everyone knows that concept wasn't his. It's too sophisticated, too innovative for someone who's never had an original idea in his life. But he's convinced them he's some kind of visionary, and now he's in too deep to admit he's out of his league." Perfect. Marcus had trapped himself, in his own lie, and I was about to spring the trap. I spent the next week finalizing the details of my counterattack. Sarah's brand, which we'd named Veritas, Truth in Latin, would launch exactly 1 week before Marcus's campaign. We'd debut with a product line that would make Lumiere's offerings look dated and a marketing approach that would redefine luxury beauty. But the real genius was in the details. I made sure our campaign would highlight every element that Marcus had missed, every innovation he'd failed to understand. When industry insiders saw both campaigns, they'd immediately recognize which one was the original vision and which was the pale imitation. The final piece of my plan was the most personal. I decided to include a subtle but unmistakable signature in our campaign, a visual element that appeared in my original proposal, something only someone who'd seen the complete strategy would recognize. When Marcus saw it, he'd know exactly who had orchestrated his downfall. As I put the finishing touches on our launch strategy, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before I met Marcus: complete confidence in my abilities. Not just professional confidence, but personal certainty that I was exactly who I was meant to be. Marcus thought he'd stolen my work and discarded me like garbage. What he'd actually done was awaken a version of myself that was more dangerous than he could have imagined. In trying to break me, he'd forged me into something unbreakable. The launch was set for Monday morning. In less than a week, the entire industry would see what Marcus had tried to steal, and they'd understand exactly what kind of person he really was. But more importantly, they'd see what I was capable of when I stopped letting someone else define my worth. I looked at myself in the mirror that Sunday night, and for the first time in 3 years, I recognized the woman staring back at me. She was harder than the old Zara, more ruthless, but also more authentic. Marcus had unknowingly created his own destroyer. Tomorrow, the world would see what happened when you underestimated Zara Okafor. And Marcus? Marcus was about to learn that some women don't just survive betrayal, they use it as fuel to burn everything down. Monday morning arrived like Christmas, New Year's, and my birthday all rolled into one perfect moment of vindication. At exactly 9 a.m., Veritas launched with a campaign so flawless, so revolutionary, that the beauty industry stopped in its tracks. By 9:15, my phone was exploding with calls from journalists, investors, and competitors. By 9:30, Marcus's world was beginning to crumble. I watched it all unfold from Sarah's office, monitoring social media, news outlets, and industry forums as our launch dominated every conversation. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Beauty influencers were calling it the campaign that changes everything. Industry veterans were hailing it as the most sophisticated brand launch in decades. And slowly but surely, people were starting to notice something very familiar about Marcus's upcoming Lumiere campaign. The first crack appeared at 10:47 a.m. Jessica texted me. "Emergency meeting at Lumiere. Board wants to know why their revolutionary campaign looks exactly like what Veritas just launched. Marcus is sweating bullets." I smiled, remembering the signature element I'd embedded in our campaign, a specific color gradient technique that appeared in my original proposal. It was subtle enough that casual observers wouldn't notice, but obvious enough that anyone in the industry would recognize it as my trademark style. Marcus had seen that proposal. He knew exactly where that technique came from. By noon, the industry blogs were running side-by-side comparisons. "Veritas versus Lumiere. Who did it first?" read the headline on Beauty Business Daily. The article was devastating for Marcus, pointing out that not only did Veritas launch first, but their strategy was more sophisticated and complete than what Lumiere had previewed. But the real bomb dropped at 2 p.m. when Cosmetics Weekly published an investigative piece titled "The Strategy That Launched 1,000 Copycats." They'd tracked down my original forum post from months ago, the one where I'd shared the incomplete version of my concept. The timeline was damning. I'd posted the idea 6 months ago. Marcus had access to it through industry forums. And now Lumiere's campaign was using those exact elements, while Veritas had clearly evolved the concept into something far more advanced. My phone rang at 2:23. Marcus's name flashed on the screen for the first time in 3 months. I let it ring 4 times before answering, savoring each buzz like a symphony of his desperation. Zara. His voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the panic underneath. "We need to talk." "Do we?" I leaned back in my chair, watching our sales numbers climb in real time. We'd moved more product in 5 hours than most beauty launches did in their first week. "I'm pretty busy running a successful company. You know, the thing you said I wasn't ambitious enough to do? You know what you're doing. This whole Veritas thing, you're trying to sabotage my campaign." The audacity was breathtaking. Even caught red-handed, he was trying to make me the villain. "I'm running my own business with my own ideas. If that somehow impacts your work, maybe you should examine why that is." "Your own ideas?" His laugh was bitter. "Come on, Zara. That gradient technique, the positioning strategy, I helped you develop those concepts when we were together." And there it was. The lie he'd probably already told his bosses, the narrative he was desperately trying to construct. In his mind, he'd already rewritten history to make himself the creative genius and me the thief. "Really?" I kept my voice perfectly calm. "Because I have time-stamped files showing I developed that technique 2 years before we even met. I also have emails proving I was working on this positioning strategy as far back as college. Would you like me to share those with Cosmetics Weekly?" "I'm sure they'd love to do a follow-up piece." The silence stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed completely. The arrogant Marcus was gone, replaced by something desperate and small. "Zara, please. They're talking about firing me. The board thinks I stole the concept from you. My career is over if this narrative sticks. Your career should be over." The words came out harder than I'd intended, carrying 3 years of suppressed anger. You don't get to systematically destroy someone's confidence, steal their work, and then ask for mercy when you get caught. I never meant to hurt you. I loved you. You loved controlling me. You loved having someone whose light you could dim to make yourself feel brighter. But you made one crucial mistake, Marcus. You thought breaking me would keep me broken. At 4 p.m., Lumiere's stock dropped 12% after they announced they were re-evaluating their upcoming campaign launch. By 5 p.m., industry insiders were reporting that Marcus had been placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation into creative authenticity concerns. But the real satisfaction came at 6:30 p.m. when I received a call from Victoria, Lumiere herself, the company's founder and CEO. "Ms. Okafor, I believe we need to have a conversation. I've spent the day reviewing your work and the timeline of events leading to our current situation. Would you be available to meet tomorrow morning?" The next day, I walked into the same Lumiere conference room where I'd bombed my presentation 6 months earlier. But this time, I wasn't the broken woman Marcus had shaped me into. I was Zara Okafor, CEO of the fastest-growing beauty brand in the industry, and I owned every inch of space I occupied. Victoria Lumiere didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You know why you're here. We made a mistake, and now we need to fix it." What would it take for Lumiere to acquire Veritas? I almost laughed. 6 months ago, I would have been thrilled by this offer. Now, it felt like an insult. "Veritas isn't for sale, Mrs. Lumiere. We're building something that your company could never create. authenticity. Then what do you want? Clearly, you've orchestrated this entire situation for a reason. She wasn't wrong. This had been calculated, deliberate, designed not just to succeed, but to make a statement. I want Marcus Rivera fired with cause. I want a public acknowledgement that he misrepresented his creative contributions. And I want Lumiere to issue a statement clarifying that any similarities between your upcoming campaign and Veritas are because your former employee appropriated concepts without authorization. Victoria studied me for a long moment. You realize this will end his career in this industry. His career should have ended the moment he decided to steal from me. I'm just making sure justice catches up with his ambition. By Thursday, all 3 of my demands had been met. Marcus was terminated for violation of creative integrity standards. Lumiere issued a statement acknowledging that their campaign development had been compromised by unauthorized use of external concepts, and Marcus's name was quietly being whispered in industry circles as someone who couldn't be trusted with original ideas. But the real victory wasn't professional. It was personal. That weekend, I was getting ready for Veritas's launch party when I caught my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was confident, powerful, unapologetically brilliant. She was everything Marcus had tried to convince me I wasn't. The launch party was everything I'd dreamed it would be. Industry leaders, influencers, journalists, and investors filled the space, all celebrating what Veritas had accomplished in just 1 week. Sarah and I stood on the stage, looking out at a room full of people who respected our vision, our innovation, our success. As I gave my speech about authenticity, innovation, and the power of believing in your own vision, I spotted a familiar face in the crowd. Marcus, looking older and smaller than I remembered, standing in the back of the room. He'd somehow gotten past security, probably using old industry connections that hadn't yet learned to avoid him. Our eyes met across the room, and for a moment, I saw him clearly. Not the confident manipulator who'd broken me down, not the arrogant thief who'd stolen my work, but a small, insecure man who'd never created anything original in his life. He'd built his entire career on other people's ideas, other people's work, other people's confidence. And now, finally, he had nothing left to steal. I finished my speech to thunderous applause, and when I looked back, Marcus was gone. I never saw him again. 6 months later, Veritas had expanded into international markets and was being courted by major investment firms. I'd been featured on the cover of 3 industry magazines and invited to speak at conferences around the world. My team had grown to 40 employees, all of whom knew they were building something revolutionary. Marcus, according to industry gossip, had moved back to his hometown and was working at a small marketing firm that specialized in local restaurants. His LinkedIn profile no longer mentioned his time at Lumiere, and his last post was from 8 months ago. Sometimes people ask me if I feel guilty about destroying his career. The answer is simple. I didn't destroy anything. I simply revealed what was already there. A man who'd built his success on lies and theft. His downfall wasn't my revenge. It was the natural consequence of his choices. The real victory wasn't watching Marcus fall. It was remembering who I was before he convinced me I was small. It was building something extraordinary from the ashes of what he'd tried to destroy. It was proving to myself that his version of me had never been the real me at all. Veritas now stands as proof that authenticity will always triumph over imitation, that original vision will always outshine stolen ideas. And every time someone tries to make me smaller, to dim my light or question my worth, I remember this moment. I remember that I am Zara Okafor, and I don't just survive betrayal, I use it to build empires. Marcus thought he was discarding someone who wasn't good enough for his ambitions. Instead, he freed someone who was too good for his limitations. And that, more than any revenge I could have planned, turned out to be the greatest gift he ever gave me. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this One hit the mark. You won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.